second session of our Midrash concerning the Parasha Breshith. I'm Rabbi Q. This is Deborah, and we're here with the congregation. We are discussing various questions that have been posted on Slack, which is our ministry network, but also potentially on YouTube. If you are following along with us live on YouTube, you are welcome to post questions. If you're not live and you're watching this later on, you can still post questions. I will get them. YouTube Studio will alert me to any new questions posted on the channel, and I will try to answer them promptly, maybe even with a video. We have been discussing not only the definition of Ezer Kenegdo, which is what Eve was to Adam, what she was created for. That's the concept of help meet or help mate in the English. We also discussed dry land being about shame. And our current question is going to be what again?
What was the nakedness besides the lack of clothing? So we had talked about earlier that in chapter 1, verse, what was it, 8, I think, that the word dry land has its
dual
meaning, and that it can mean nakedness and shame. And I think that's where this question is coming from. What was the nakedness besides the lack of clothing? Because we don't even have a lack of clothing at this point.
Well, let's get into it. And by the way, we're consuming some everything bagel challah and coffee and tea so I apologize if that's a little bit rude, but it is lunchtime. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's go and look at a very specific verse, which is going to be in Genesis chapter 3. And specifically what we're going to be looking at is this part right here. At the moment their eyes were opened and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness, they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. So going into the Hebrew, we have some very interesting things going on. For example, one of them definitely has to do with the concept of nakedness, but also the concept of covering themselves. So we always look at it from the point of view of, let me get out of this for just a moment. We'll come back to it. We always look at it from the point of view of the uncovering of the body parts that are covered by underwear as being the nakedness of a human being. And although there is definitely a context of that, and what I mean by that is that basically we have the incident where David learns of a certain king having a sickness, and he sends emissaries to that king, and that king shaves off half their beard and cuts off the back half of their garment so that their butt is exposed, and they return to David in shame. Okay. So in this case, we have their butt being exposed, which is a nakedness of the parts that underwear covers. But we also see something else in which he sends them, of all places, right, to, I believe it is a city of refuge. I'm not going to take the time to verify that. So if you want to verify that, you can. But he sends them to a place to where they could grow back their beard. Now, there's a number of things that are important there. And the first one is obviously the ancients interpreted the Torah commandment in Leviticus about beards to be about beards, right? Some people say, oh, no, that's not about beards. That's just, you're not supposed to, wear a goatee, or you're not supposed to do this. Christian men today, on a regular basis, as a practice, shave their face. And yet it is a shame for it to be shaved there. Okay, that was a little sideline. Getting back to the concept, though, nakedness is their beard being cut off. And that was sufficient to be shame for them, to the point where David sends them to a place where they will not be humiliated. Because most people there are already in a state of humiliation because they're in the city of refuge, right? Pretty sure it was city of refuge. It was some city like that anyways. Okay. So we know that the word shame is being used, right? How is it being used? That's where we need to go back into Genesis chapter 2. Okay. So we know that when their eyes were open, they noticed they were naked. And that's the nakedness that I think Cindy is mentioning. But of course, Cindy has been in this congregation a long time, and she is asking a very stimulating question, probably on purpose. But let's see. Genesis chapter 2, going to the end of the chapter, we see this verse. Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Let's go look. Look at this. Boosh. Remember our discussion earlier about dry land? There's our word boosh, to put to shame, to be ashamed, to be disconcerted or disappointed. And in the Strong's definition, it says a primitive root, properly to pale, and by implication to be ashamed. Why? Because the parts of your body that the sun doesn't hit are exposed, right? But very specifically, what is this saying? One has been cast away from the tent, to press away from the tent. There's the sheen, which is the two front teeth, which represent pressing, right? And there's the bait, the which represents the tent itself. Okay, that's not working very well. But let's see if we can do it here. So here's the sheen, right? And here's the bait with the sheen. Okay. And so pressing away from the tent is shame. So nakedness in and of itself has something to do with shame. How do we know? Because it says they're naked and not ashamed, right?
Well, it says they're ashamed not.
They're
right?
ashamed not, right? In fact, I believe it actually says they will be ashamed not. Let's take a look. So Hith Polel. Okay, so Hith Polel is a very, very the Hith Polel is a very interesting conjugation, but it means whoops. It's not giving me the okay, it's not popping up the definition of Hith Polel. How do I explain Hith Polel? All right, so Hith Polel is let's talk about this for a second because it's a very interesting conjugation. So Hith Polel can occur in one of two ways. Either it can be happening externally back and forth, or it can be happening internally back and forth. Okay. For example, if we were to use the Hebrew word katal, katal means to kill. Okay. To unalive, right? And katal is basically the concept of taking a life. Okay, so it's not dying natural causes. Okay, so taking a life in the past tense would be he killed, right? In the present tense, it would be killing. And in the future tense, it would be he will kill. That's how Hebrew works. You either have done it, you will do it, or you are doing it. Okay, that's the concept. Now, once you add the Heath Hillel to it, it is causing something to happen to you. For example, if I say Heath Katalti, Heath Katalti means I killed myself. If I say Heath Katal knew, we killed ourselves, as in you killed me and I killed you. It's reflexive, okay? So in this case, they were not ashamed of each other. Does that make sense?
But if it also goes internally, do you know what I mean? It's not just that reflexive, but it also goes in return internally, then also there's no polarity to it.
Mhm.
There's no wishy-washiness to it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no back and forth of the flesh versus
Right.
the ego versus life and back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
So it's making me think again of consciousness, right? Taking it up to that level, taking it up to that realm of consciousness of um, transparency, right? You say boosh, paleness, transparency, not ashamed.
oh yeah, we're gonna get there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
it's taking me to there of like just, you are naked, you are transparent, you are of again the oneness echad, sharing everything, panim panim, like that's what it's making me think of, all of those things between
Can I
Adam and Eve.
can I give it for instance? So years back, so I've been in Torah for over 15 years now, actually, almost 17 years, I think. But I was in a Torah observant community and I was part of the worship team. And there would be many times where I would be in front of the congregation, and Sally, mom, can be a witness to what I'm stating. There'd be many times that I'd be in front of the congregation and I would be at the time worshiping the intensification of all power in the universe to the best of my ability and knowledge at that moment. And as far as I was concerned, it was just me and the intensification of all power in the universe, just me and God. There was nothing else. There was not the people that I was standing in front of. And once that worship had stopped, and I understood at that moment that I was standing in front of the entire congregation, I would oftentimes run out of the room. And one day someone asked me, why do you do that? And I'm like, well, because I have just bore my soul in front of all of you. And now once I'm done, I feel naked, absolutely naked. I had to run out of the room because I felt so exposed. Doing that in front of everyone. That I could, it was and I loved what you said, Josh, that it was the transparency of my soul at that moment. And coming out of it, it made me feel absolutely exposed. Yeah.
Okay. Those are awesome. And I appreciate those insights. It is necessary at this point that we move a little bit further into the story from this point in Genesis chapter 2, where they are not ashamed, to where they are ashamed, and what the solution is. Okay. So we will go forward into Genesis chapter 3. And what you're going to find is that when we get into Genesis chapter 3, the word bush is again in existence, but not how you would think. So going down to verse 21, and Yahweh Elohim made clothing from animal skins for Adam and his wife. And we go into the Hebrew and we find this word right here, and clothed them. In the Hiphil, which is the causative. See down here it says Hiphil usually expresses the causative action. Let me explain something to you. In English, we do not have, there we go. In English, we do not have an equivalent of this verbal conjugation. It is the causative, which means something else causes the verb to occur. And in this case, it is lavash, lamed, beit, sheen. Recall from our first session, and you guys can go back and watch that we discussed how dry land could be shame. And what we explained is the beit sheen was about the danger of being outside the clan, not outside the camp, but cut off from your people. Cut off from your people meant desert. Desert meant dryness, and only by figurativeness is the word dry land properly translated there. What it should be is an ashamed land. But the premise is that no matter what, however we view it, lamed beit sheen, adding the lamed, causes it to become to clothe. And that's where we see this. And here's the amazing thing about this. If we create Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 as a central point and spread everything out from there in a cyclical manner, we have the entire illustration of nakedness. We haven't even touched the word nakedness yet. All we've touched is the effect, not the cause. We've touched the effect of nakedness, which is shame, right? Exposure, as Deborah has expressed it, the removing of half the beard as shame, as bush. And if we went into that story, I'm sure that it actually says in the Hebrew, it caused them bush or shame or bashash. Okay. Now, so we have lavush or lavash, we have lavash, which is the solution to nakedness, which is the covering of the body. But lavash in the ancient pictographic Hebrew is just a shepherd's crook being added to pushing away from the tent, which means adding the authority to the place of honor covers the shame. Okay. All right. So now we can get into nakedness, which is going to be a very, very difficult concept. I'm excited though. I'm looking forward to it. We like difficult concepts, don't we? Going to Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. In the Hebrew, they were not ashamed, right? Hithpolo, they were not ashamed of themselves, right? They were not ashamed of themselves. Here we go. Lo is the negation particle. So what weren't they? Why weren't they ashamed of themselves? Because they saw in their eyes, right? So let's look at this. So basically, both or the two of them, that's going to be very important in this discussion. The two of them were Ahrom. Ahrom, okay? In the Hebrew, Ahrom from the root Ahrum, to be subtle, shrewd, crafty, beware, or take crafty counsel. Wait a minute, what?
Put on the brakes again.
What just happened? Why, when we drop into the root of the word nakedness, do we all of a sudden end up with being crafty and subtle? I will show you why. Before I do, though, there's two points that I need to make. Number one, in the original pictographic Hebrew, which is what Moshe would have been writing in when he created the scrolls of Torah before the Babylonian exile, in which we started using the Aramaic characters and not pictographs. Even during David's time, we still had the pictographs. But when we start to get into the latter years of the kings, all of a sudden we start to the pictographs start evolving into a scripted text and not drawings anymore. The same happened to Egypt around the same time. They went from hieroglyphics to other ways of writing. Same thing happened in Sumeria around the same time. They went from cuneiform pictographs to cuneiform letter systems, and thereby removed the story from the language. Okay? We removed the story from the Egyptians, removed the story from the Sumerians, and removed the story from the ancient Semites. Okay? So in ancient Semitic, or what we call Proto-Sinaitic, the pictographs depict a story behind the words. Point number two, that was point number one, there are no vowel points. Point number two, this word has two meanings, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. In fact, you're going to find that every single time the ayin is used, it has a dual meaning set. Okay? So we'll get into that a little bit, but what I want you to picture is, how does an ancient Hebrew who does not know anatomy, does not know psychology, does not know philosophy, does not know the things that the Greeks developed discovered as part of their system of politics and reality and whatever, is the principle that there is a word system created to describe the things that the Hebrews are describing through concrete terms. Remember, if you could see it, hear it, or feel it, it existed. So they have to observe something, they have to hear something, or they have to touch something in order for it to be a part of their reality. And therefore, their pictographs tell that story. Okay? Now, the concept is basically going to be about the world of observation. So how does a Hebrew describe the mentally ill? The Hebrew says, this man is not making rational statements. Therefore, he must not be looking at things correctly. So he takes the word, the Hebrew pictograph of the eye, and says it has become twisted by drawing a twisted rope and saying that the man has become twisted in his observation. So the word ayin is actually the ancient Hebrew letter ga. Ga is N-G-H. I'm sorry, N-G-A-H. Nga. Okay? Nga is a twisted rope. So the way that a man during Abraham's time describes the state of a human who is not looking at something correctly is the twisted rope and a human head, pronounced ra, with an NGH at the end, ra. Okay? And wrong is our Hebrew or our English word for incorrect, wrong. Okay? Our Hebrew word, however, is translated in the English as what?
Evil.
Evil. So now we see the ga and the ayin present as the same word, resh ayin, being the word evil, or what other word?
What other word?
Resh ayin.
Oh.
So we have twisted mind or man watches, which is what?
Friend.
Friend. So isn't this interesting? The ancient Hebrews, with their hear, touch, see, decide that when a man looks incorrectly at something, his mind has become twisted.
Evil.
Evil. But when a man is cared for by a friend, his eye is upon a man, and therefore it is his friend. In fact, when it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say shepherd, it says friend. Okay? Okay, so now, and this is important, when we look at that, what we are looking at is the concept of that dual meaning behind the ga. The ayin, the letter ayin, which we're going to look at. Remember, we saw that ahrom, and then we went to the root, and all of a sudden we were in subtlety and craftiness. Why? I'll show you why. So here we are with Arom. right?
This letter is the ayin, right?
That first letter is the ayin. This letter right here is the ayin. Ayin is doubling as something twisted or as something in a state of observation. Both have the connotation of observation. But in this case, interestingly enough, look at this. A primitive root. Okay, what's a primitive root? The two-letter root. But here's the intrigue. The resh, the mem, and the ayin make it a adopted root. To be bare, but used only in a derivative sense through the idea of perhaps smoothness, or to be cunning, usually in a bad sense. So let's go look at first usage of the word aram in the Hebrew. 1 Samuel 23:22. Go and check again and be sure of where he is staying and who has seen him there, for I know that he is very crafty. Who are we talking about here? Let's go read the context. But now the men of Ziph went to Saul in Gibeah and betrayed David to say to him, we know where David is hiding. They said, he is in the strongholds of Horesh on the hill of Hekila, which is in the southern part of Jeshimon. Come down whenever you are ready, O king, and we will catch him and hand him over to you. The Lord bless you, Saul said. At last, someone is concerned about me. Go and check again to be sure of where he is staying and who has seen him there, for I know that he is very crafty. Discover his hiding places and come back when you are sure. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the area at all, I'll track him down, and even if I have to search every hiding place in Judah. So the men of Ziph returned home ahead of Saul. Meanwhile, David and his men had moved into the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah Valley, south of Jeshimon. Okay, so what have we learned from that? Let's talk about this a moment. What is crafty? What is the word crafty really indicating here? Is it indicating that David is naked? No. Is it indicating that he's vulnerable? No. Is it indicating that he's ashamed, half the beard being cut off? No. We have a reference to shame being related to an exposure, even of the removal of the beard. Okay? And in that sense, what I want you to think about is when Saul says, I want you to be very careful in this circumstance because he is crafty. What does Saul mean? That David is smart, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. When we look in the Strong's Concordance definition, now remember James Strong had strengths and weaknesses. Here's one of his strengths. He knew of the primitive roots. Here's one of his weaknesses. He was a Protestant Christian. Okay? He was not able to contain himself within the sandbox of the ancient Hebrew language and lifestyle and culture, but instead tried to renegotiate his definitions to reflect a Protestant American Christian, I think he was American, culture. And so what he does is he forces English down the Hebrew culture's throat when it comes to these things. But he's smart enough to know that the primitive root has something to do with smoothness, and therefore the craftiness is basically the smoothness. So are we dealing with deception here? No. We're dealing with tactical advantage. He says, go and make sure David's really there, because it's possible that he tricked you, not deceived you, but that you think he's there, but he's not. Go find out all his hiding places, and then I'll come search for him. Because I know that when I go search for him, he's not there. It's not a deception. David is smart. He knows how Saul operates. Why? Because he knows all of his strategies from war. He was at war with Saul many times. Okay? Now, does that equate to deception? No. That equates to an intellectual advantage. Let's see if we can find anything else. So that's the first usage of Aram, Ahin Resh Mem. But let's see if we can find a place where that craftiness is used in an infinitive. Going to Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. The serpent was the shrewdest of all of the wild animals Yahweh had made. Okay? Going into the Hebrew, we have the word ahum, ahum. Subtle, shrewd, crafty, sly, sensible, used 11 times in the Strong's Concordance, and is the passive participle of none other than Aram, which happens to also be the root of the word nakedness. So it's interesting because all that has changed between this word and this word is the movement of the vowel point. Let me show you again. There, there. Ahrom is naked. Ahrum is shrewd. Okay? Now, going back to the original, no, we're not going to do it that way. Going back to the original root, we immediately get into crafty or subtle. However, in the primitive roots or the ancient pictographs, to make bare, but used only in the derivative sense through the idea of perhaps smoothness, to be cunning, usually in a bad sense, or to be very beware or crafty, used 5 times. Let's look at the other uses of arom here. Psalm chapter 83, verse 3. They devise crafty schemes against your people. They conspire against your precious ones. Proverbs 15:5. Only a fool despises a parent's discipline. Whoever learns from correction is wise. Well, that's a really interesting way to put it. Where is that in this? Let's take a look. Where is that in our discussion? Oh, looky there. It's the word for wise, sensible, aram, right? So,
And a fool is what word?
a fool.
Mm-hmm.
It is a vil, right?
Is that where we get the word evil?
Oh, it's possible, I suppose. I don't know. Let's take a look here.
Strong's H191. Evil. Evil. Second
foolish.
entry.
To be foolish.
Evili.
Okay. So to be foolish. Now, so that's our proverb, right? Proverbs 15:5.
Hmm.
A fool rejects discipline of his father, but he who regards reproof is arum. Right? Getting back into that concept of arum. Let's go back to our Samuel verse. Check again, be sure, because he's very crafty, right? In the Hebrew, using it here, he's very crafty, right? Okay, so now getting back into that word aram, we can look at the other usages. Other uses, Proverb 19:25. If you punish a mocker, the simple-minded will learn a lesson. But if you correct the wise, they will be all the wiser. Let's go see that. And so, of course, we have if you correct what? The wise, the crafty, right? So, a scoffer strike a scoffer, and the naive may become shrewd, right? They may become aram, but reprove them and they will gain knowledge. Okay, so really what we're looking at here, so that wisdom was not the right word. The word here is become shrewd. So if you punish a mocker, the simple-minded will learn a lesson. Okay, so now going back into so we can actually do it this way. Going back into our word, Adam, those are the 4 verses, right? In which it is used. So where's the 5th time? Interesting that one of them is interpreted very, which is intriguing. But okay, getting back to our concept of Arum versus Aron. Two very important points that need to be brought forward. The first one, can we definitively say that Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed?
I noticed something.
Go ahead.
All right. So I noticed that we have a yod and a mem.
Okay.
With Adam and Eve. We have a vav with the serpent, and we had a yod with wise.
Okay.
So it made me think that we're being told something with those letters in those words. So the yod in the wise is like Hokmah, right? It's the spark of that intelligence and everything. And then with Adam and Eve, we have the flow, that water, the mem, the water, the flow of the spark, of the divine spark of the yod into this wiseness, into this. And then with the serpent, we have a vav, so it's staking it or rooting it. So it's
securing it.
Yeah, securing it. So basically it's turning
or
it back.
establishing it.
Yeah, like turning it back on itself for itself.
Interesting.
Right. And then the mem would also be plural, so shared between Adam and Eve.
Interesting. Because where does Yod Mim come from? Right? You said the common one was the Yod, the Mim, and the Vav, right?
Yes, we had the Yod in Wise, we had the Yod and the Mem in the Adam and Eve instance, and we had the Vav in the serpent.
So we have Yod Mim Vav, which is what? Yom, which is the Hebrew word for day. And without encroaching too much upon Genesis and the image of God, because we're going to remake that series, it is a work in chaos. In fact, Yod Mem, Yod Vav Mem, is a Hebrew three-letter root that is a parent root. We drop the Vav. I'm sorry, is a child root. We drop the Vav. We get the parent root, Yod Mem, which is sea. He called the waters that were collected into one place sea. The west is Yod Mem. The word day is the Yod Mem. The word that has to do with the concept of the sun disappearing behind the western border of Israel, which is the sea, is a very real philosophical sense of the completion of a day, the ending of a day occurring and a new day beginning as the sun drops behind the horizon. The day ends and begins with the sun dropping behind the horizon. A work in chaos ends and begins with the sun dropping behind the horizon. A co-authorship of creation begins and ends with the sun dropping behind the horizon in the west. Okay, you guys jiving with me here? You feeling what I'm putting out here? So those are interesting letters that you have identified as the singled out letters. So definitively, can we say that it actually says in the Hebrew, they were naked and not ashamed? No, and I will tell you why. Because Ayin, Chesh, Vav, Mem are present in both instances of the word. There is no vowel point in the ancient Hebrew pictographs, nor in the scroll, meaning Arum and Arom are the same word. So either the serpent was naked, which some people have interpreted and said, oh, the serpent was naked. Therefore, this might have been a sexual thing. Or Adam and Eve were more enlightened than any beast of the field. The intrigue comes from the concept of the dual meaning. Let me explain. The Ga itself is derived from an ayin and a hey. Now, when we look at the hey, we look back to our scene of the sun dropping behind the horizon, beginning and ending a day in the west behind the sea, which is the work of chaos. Remember, the sea was this tumultuous piece of information that didn't follow any rules. It was a consumer of human life. It was destructive and it was fearful for the Israelites. In fact, the Israelites intentionally did not dwell on the shores of the Mediterranean, even after the Philistine occupation had ended, which is intriguing because even to this day, we really don't go for any major beach dwelling provinces in Israel, so to speak. There's of course Tel Aviv, Haifa, that harbor beach there, but other than that, there's really not.
The Galilee.
Yeah, the Galilee.
Let me make sure I was clear. The Arum with the serpent lacks the yod.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
And right. Like,
and lacks the reflexive.
Right. And that's what I was trying to say is like the wise has the yod, the Adam and Eve has the yod and the extra mem. And the one with the serpent does not. So it lacks the divine spark.
Oh, what? Okay.
I think that's what I may have to go look again.
No, yeah. Well, so let's look at that real quick because I think that's important. Okay. So first of all, let's do Genesis chapter 2, and we will we'll screenshot that. Okay, and then we will split view the screenshot. Where to go? Right there. Come on. Why isn't it on? This one? There we go. Okay, so we'll screenshot that, and then we'll go over to Genesis chapter 1 or chapter 3 and have those side by side. So here's that word. So we have the yod, tav, bait, sheen. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. Here we go. We have the ayin, chesh, vav, mim, yod, mim, and this one we have the ayin, resh, vav, mim. So Josh is pointing out that the yod and the mim are present in the word when it talks about being naked, but then the yod mim are missing from the other. And of course, we know the reason why that is true in this sense. Let's just go look at that real quick, and then we'll come back because we need these side by side. So we'll go into Genesis chapter 2 real quick here and take a look at the conjugation. So the conjugation puts it as an adjective, plural, masculine. So those men were not ashamed. And then when we go into it, it's naked and bare, right? Not ashamed. Those men were not naked. Those men were naked. So it places it in that. But Arum itself is a it is a I think it's an infinitive. Let's see, does it say it's an infinitive? No, but doesn't necessarily say it's an infinitive. Used 16 times, and every time that it is used, it is definitely nakedness. He tore off his clothes and lay naked on the ground all day and all night, prophesying in the presence of Samuel. The people who were watching exclaimed, "What? Is even Saul a prophet?" Right? And then Job chapter 1, verse 21, he said, "I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave." Yahweh gave me what I had, and Yahweh has taken away. Praise the name of Yahweh. Job 22:6. For example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded nothing as security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone or made him naked. Job chapter 24, verse 7. All night they lie naked in the cold without clothing or covering, right? Job 24:10. The poor must go about naked without any clothing. They harvest food for others while they themselves are starving. Job chapter 26, verse 6. The underworld is naked in God's presence, and the place of destruction is uncovered. Ecclesiastes 5:15. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. Isaiah 20, verse 2. Yahweh told Isaiah, son of Amos, take off the burlap you have been wearing and remove your sandals. Isaiah did as he was told and walked around naked and barefoot. Isaiah 20, verse 3. Then the Lord said, my servant Isaiah has been walking around naked and barefoot for the last 3 years. This is a sign, a symbol of terrible troubles I will bring upon Egypt and Ethiopia. Okay, I'm not going to keep going here, but actually, you know what? I want one more right here. Hosea 2:3. Otherwise, I will strip her naked as she was on the day she was born. I will leave her to die of thirst as in the dry and barren wilderness. Look at that play on words. Look at that craziness there. That word dry, I can almost guarantee, is going to be boosh. Can almost guarantee it. Nope, it's not. Okay. Anyways, so getting back to Genesis chapter 3, we do have that interesting instance that it's not plural. Now, part of that is because there is no they going on with the Nakash. Nakash is singular, right? In fact, I believe that this word haya right here is third person masculine singular, right? Okay. Whereas in this case over here, which we would have to go here to do, let me just go there really quick, and then we'll get back to this discussion. Whoops. In this case, this is going to be masculine plural because the two of them is, or both, is masculine plural, and the copula, or what we call is in English, right, is third person masculine plural. They both were naked. The Adam and his Ish, right? And they will be ashamed not. Okay? Okay. Now, getting back into the discussion, Josh is pointing something interesting out, and this will somewhat encroach upon Genesis in the image of God, but that there are two waters when Adam and Eve are dealing with not being ashamed. Again, this is just plural. The Yod Mem makes everything plural because the vastness of the sea and the multiplication of the sea. But the Ayin, Resh, Vav, Mem, Yod Mem together creates a second waters, whereas there is just one singular water here in that Mem. There are two waters with the addition of the Mem, or what we call the hidden waters. The waters that are from above are concealed. There is a concealment. That is important. Okay. So the question that we have here is it that there was a necessity, and this again is Midrash, so we're going to speculate here. Pretty much, I will tell you truthfully, we have not done a lot of speculation today, but this is one where we are going to speculate. Did Adam have to have a concealment of the second waters in order to come into the realm of Tikkun with the 99% realm at this lower level where we are in the actual physical, in the realm of emanation? The reason that I ask this is because when we work on the concept of mass equaling energy that has diminished, mass being the formation of material in the Higgs field, where quanta is diminished in its speed, it slows down. So it hits at the speed of light, hits the Higgs field. The Higgs field acts like a net and slows it way down, like the slingshot on an aircraft carrier. The concept is that it slows it way down, and as it does, the mass increases in density. Could we say that in order for the vessel of reception to truly receive, she had to have the second waters concealed, which is why the serpent or the ego doesn't have the second yod and mem? And the reason I bring this up is because it says the Adam and his Ish. It doesn't say the Ish and his Isha. It says the Adam and his Isha. Sorry. So the Adam and his woman, which is very different, right? Were Arum. So let's just not worry about the definition of it at this point. We'll just call it Arum. They were Arum and not ashamed, and they will be ashamed not. Yet when it comes time for the serpent to speak, if the serpent is the ego of Eve, of course Adam can't hear that discussion anymore, can he? In the Protestant Christian Garden of Eden, the serpent speaks right in front of Adam and he does nothing, which is a great way to illustrate a cowardly husband, but that really doesn't jive with the context of how Adam operates in the garden. Instead, what we see is this ego operating with Eve, Adam not hearing the conversation, and Eve's voice then dictating the need for Adam to eat the fruit, because if he didn't, he was going to be completely off the reservation. She gives Satan his portion. That, of course, was only because Adam created a Torah that could be challenged, because he created a Talmud instead of a Torah. And that Talmud was, do not touch that tree. Actually, a displacement of his guilt about the thought of eating from the tree, which in and of itself is where we come into the very battle, which Yeshua said, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed it, which means you've already called upon yourself the punishment without ever violating Torah. And most likely you're going to be punishing yourself. So you're like, oh man, I can't believe I looked at that woman. That was my best friend's wife. Now all of a sudden I'm a piece of crap. I don't deserve to be his friend anymore. And so you psychologically begin making micro adjustments to cause a division between you and your friend so that you will be removed from the picture, and therefore now that's not the issue. However, the problem is that most likely that desire came from an exposure that wasn't supposed to happen in the first place on her part because of that secret voice that we're talking about right now. Now, having said that, I think it's very important that we look at this, and that's not to blame women. Let me correct something there. I'm not saying that it is the woman's fault that a man looks, but I am saying that if she keeps her vessel closed and not open and exposed, and that doesn't have to do with clothing, that happens to do with what her heart does, then that won't occur. In fact, I think it's Rabbi Manis says that emotional cheating is actually the worst kind. That the cheating of the flesh will be forgiven, but the emotional attachment to another as a result of an exposure of emotions can and will create separation. Okay, so in principle, let's say that we now delve into the concept of the twisting versus the observation, because remember we have this observer looking out over the western bank of what would be the eastern bank of the Mediterranean, but the westernmost border of Israel, in awe of this magnanimous creation that contains these crazy monsters, these crazy storms, and these crazy ideas. Also eats the sun, so to speak, right? And ends a day, but also begins a day or a work in chaos. He's in awe and he throws his hands up. And that is the illustration of the hay or the observer. Now, where this becomes important is once we start to add an observer to the process, then we find ourselves in the realm of the concept of quantum mechanics and that tunneling that I've spoken about, where you can connect to the future version and then understand the now version because of that future version. We use it to help people realize their visions, especially in business, but we also use it to diminish the power of trauma in the past by taking the future self that's okay and teaching the damaged self that they are okay. The damaged self will cease to exist. And so what we are looking at here is the idea of the observer being the one who has seen. Why is this important? Because where the definition actually breaks down is nowhere else but in that twisting versus the eye. So remember at the beginning, we have this person and they are looking at the world incorrectly. They say, that is a piece of ice. And the person looking at him says, how can that be a piece of ice? It doesn't melt. That is not ice. That is a rock. You are looking at it incorrectly. Your mind is twisted. Okay? So then they define mental illness as the twisted mind, which we have translated in the English as the word evil. Okay? And then we identify that the word light is a strong mind, or the lead ox and the human head. So a strong mind is somebody who is in a state of the light, and a twisted mind is somebody who's in a state of the darkness. The hay and the ayin together mean observe the twisting of what? Of the goat hair on the tent. Remember the concept of paneling the tent? layering the tent, paneling the tent. The hay in the word ga is the paneling of the tent or the twisting of the goat hair. It all comes back to the concept of starry night, which is where some of the light, just a little bit of the light, gets into the tent because of the goat hair, the goat skins expanding and contracting in the sunlight. And so that's where we get the word star, is that kakav, right? Is that concept of the covering of the goat skins, and that's where we get the concept of star, because we're looking at the stars in the night sky on the goat skin, on the tent, in the middle of the day. And so from that, now we derive that the Ga means darkness. The Ga equates to a concealing of the light. So a twisted mind is concealed from the light or hindered from the light. Okay? Evil is a hindering of the light. But now watch this. It gets even better here, because the concept then is that now we go and we look at words, for example, erev. Erev. What is erev? Evening, which is ahin chresh mem. So the darkness of man's chaos is the evening, or the beginning of a day, the ending of a day. The beginning and end of a day being the same cyclical process. Remember 360 coming back to zero? Okay, so now we take it a step further. And what is that step? It is simple. What is the difference between the one who observes the rock correctly and the one who thinks it's ice because it's hard and because it looks like a rock? Or I'm sorry, because it looks like ice, because it glistens in the sun or something. Now he looks at that and he says, that is a rock. He looks correctly. He observes correctly. Okay? And as he's observing correctly, he then identifies the concept of what? He identifies the concept of there being a concrete view of the thing correctly, that is an enlightened or a naked mind, as it were, because his eye has observed. So we go from the darkness of the twisted rope to the eye observing correctly. So where it says naked, twisted rope, where it says crafty or intelligent or shrewd, eye observing, right? Or perhaps we switch those around. But the point being is that one is about a correct viewing and one is about a twisted perception. And so now we understand that nakedness is a very, very different concept than what we have thought in the past. And the sewing of fig leaves to cover themselves is where we get ourselves caught up, because again, now all of a sudden the sewing of fig leaves indicates a covering of the parts that the underwear are supposed to cover. So in summary, the ayin is the darkening of the eye, as the ga. The ayin as the pictograph of the eye, and not the twisted rope, is the light of the eye. The twisted rope being the darkness, the light being, now you could see how they're dual. Now you could see where the ayin and the ga are one letter by the time we get to Torah. By the time Moses writes the scroll, there is no God. To our knowledge, anyways. The God diminishes in what we call proto-Sinaitic, pre-Sinai, right? I'm sorry, not proto-Sinaitic. I think it's proto-Sumerian is where we still see the God. By the time we get to Sinai, there is no God. Okay. Thoughts? Questions? Any more questions?
So you're saying
what's like?
From that, then you're saying that it sounded like you're saying then Adam and either Adam and Eve naked is mistranslated and the snake is mistranslated, or you're saying the snake saw clearly or the serpent saw clearly.
Correct. And what did he see clearly? That there was an anti-Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, it is so crazy because if you think about it, this gets into so many things. And Cindy, thank you so much for that question. This gets into the concept of punishing yourself for something that you've already been forgiven for. This gets, because what is that really? It's a false Torah. Torah said an eye for an eye. You're done. You paid for it. Done. Be done. Right? So your eyes cut out. Now you don't walk around in shame anymore. You walk around with one eye observing Torah. Right? Tooth for a tooth. Your tooth is knocked out. You're no longer considered the violator. You've paid. And therefore now you are restored to the fullness of the blessings of Torah. And it's interesting because that in and of itself is a social justice to say, all right, the person has done their time. Now let them live. Leave them alone. Let them live. If they commit a crime again, then punish them again. But let them live. And stop being the thought police, right? Stop trying to say, oh, well, they're going to do it again, right? And the premise is that also another thing that we have within that context is the idea of making rules for ourselves. Oh, has our congregation erred in this way? Being angry because we don't do a certain tradition correctly. And now you see where the serpent gets its voice because you are zealous for a tradition. During the water ceremony, I told this congregation, if we do not become anti-tradition for a while until we balance out and stop being zealous for tradition, then we are not going to be able to continue. Because the moment that we become zealous for a tradition, we give Satan a foothold. And here's the power behind it. Once that vessel is open, once that foothold is open, it has to be satisfied. Which is crazy because that means that once Adam created the anti-Torah, the serpent was created with it. Which means if we all wanted to know where the serpent came from, we might needs look in the direction of Adam's unstable vessel. Thoughts?
I feel like one, yes. I think that is, man, how do I say this? I think the serpent already existed before Adam.
As a potential. Mm-hmm.
Right? I think it existed as soon as there was a desire to receive.
Mm. Did it happen as soon as God brought the animals to him?
I think it happened as soon as the firmament was created and separated the waters from the waters.
There's a very, very powerful study. It will probably surface in Genesis in the image of God concerning the word for people versus the word for concealment. And I think it is ayin mem mem versus ayin mem. So the word people is ayin mem, and the word concealment is ayin mem mem.
Hmm.
So once the waters were separated, the people became the people, and the waters above became the waters of Hashamayim, and therefore it was a very different circumstance.
Yeah. Now, I do agree, make sure I say this, that it entered man as ego the moment Adam did that. So make sure I say that.
But it already existed as an energy.
Right.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
An energy to tikkun. Here's the crazy part about it. Listen, Christianity has the world convinced that there is an external persona equal and opposite to God in omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence, able to convince you to reject God and
Whoa.
lead you to hell.
Wait a minute. Okay. Wait a minute. So Satan says, or Nakash, the adversary, says, did he really do this or whatever? And like, if it had just been humility, no, I got this wrong, like, tikkun occurs. Like, it just fixes itself right then. So, but they double down into that desire instead, and it creates the next thing, it's like a chain. So Satan, in that instance, Nakash, sorry, is Messiah. He's saying in that instance, hey, did God really say that? No, God didn't really say that. Okay, and it could have been fixed right then.
Wow. It's interesting. I don't know if it's Messiah, but it is definitely the opportunity for the tikkun, because the Messiah is the status changer, right? He changes. He's a people mover.
Yeah.
He moves people from the Mitzrayim, the Egypt, into the land of promise, flowing with milk and honey.
So it's not Messiah in that sense, because all it would have done was corrected them, and they would have stayed on that same level. It wouldn't have elevated them. So yeah, okay,
right. But
interesting.
Okay. So I believe we've satisfied that question. I think we need to take the rest of the time, because we've been at this for a while. And to tell you the truth, I don't know that everybody can do this way, but I can tell you that Josh and I can do it all day long. Okay. But we're going to be empathetic. I want to take one more break, and we can refresh ourselves and rest ourselves for a moment. I'm going to say it is 3:15 now. Let's come back at 3:30 this time. And so about 15 minutes from now, actually just change to 3:16. So 14 minutes from now, we'll come back and we will learn about the theme of this year's cycle. Okay. And for those of you who are not wanting to stay, I'll say Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are going to stay,